Hi, welcome to my review for The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This is one of my favourite fantasy books. I loved it. It was really easy to read. Once I picked it up, I couldn't put it down. A lot of reviewers have said that this book is quite different to standard fantasy stories, that it's shaken up fantasy literature somewhat. It's definitely very different in style and focus to your standard fantasy story. But it's obviously very much still a fantasy novel, though sort of grounded rather than strictly high fantasy, I suppose. Now, in terms of a little background, Patrick Rothfuss has put a lot of work into this. I saw an interview with him and he said he'd spent 7 years writing out his entire ideas, and then another 7 years editing them and putting them together into the one book. So this one book has had 14 years put into its ultimate creation. So previous to writing, he'd spent a lot of time at university studying a wide range of subjects. So his book includes content from various things he studied, like philosophy, religion, science, social cultures and different cultures, all that sort of stuff. So it's got a lot of interesting ideas in it, and there's a lot of depth in the cultures. So the basic premise of the novel is it's the story of Kvof and his adventures in life and his various careers. So the story starts off with Kvof in present. He's a man of many achievements and repute, and he works under a pseudonym as a barkeep in a tavern. And he works there with his friend slash employer, Bast. So he agrees to tell the story of his past life to a chronicler. And so the story begins, and Kvof tells the chronicle of his tale from life as a young boy. We hear of his adventures, and this is the main part of this book. Interestingly, the book's written from two perspectives, from two views. The storytelling framework is written in the third person. That is when he's in the tavern telling the story to the chronicler who's recording it. But the main part of Kvof's life story is written in the first person. So it's interesting in that very few books mix up perspective, first and third person like this. That's very unusual. But in this book it works really well and it's quite seamless. So what's good about it? The world building is great. So the world is described in great detail. It's very realistic, and it seems roughly like your typical medieval-esque fantasy world. The detail, it's just great. There's a lot of detail paid to different things like, just the money system, the intricate life in taverns, the college life as a traveling musician, details about music, the various cultures and details of the world. Very realistic, and all that sort of detail brought to life. There isn't cumbersome world exposition. It's generally done through show rather than tell. And there isn't elongated stories, and there aren't elongated stories and explanations. The world exposition sort of happens as various things occur. So while the world is quite grounded, magic does appear in it, but it sort of appears in a realistic and interesting fashion, and magic isn't overwhelmingly everywhere, here, there, and everywhere. So the storytelling method is interesting, and as mentioned, it's framed around Kvof telling his story, written in third person. It then switches to Kvof's actual story, written in first person, and the interaction between the two stories is really interesting, as it occasionally switches between one and the other. The storytelling itself is exciting, and overall I found it really well written. As mentioned, Rothfuss has put a lot of time into it. You see Kvof, and he's got a challenging life, at times a very tough life, and you really improvise with him because he's often quite the underdog. The characters are great. Kvof, the main character, is an entertaining, empathetic character. He's constantly going through challenges and generally coming out on top. He's gifted but not perfect. Some of the characters are developed and engaging, while some of the other characters I found not to be that developed. And I sort of found some of the secondary characters blended into each other. Though I did notice a lot of people don't. I found that, but found a lot of people didn't seem to find that. So maybe that's just me. The plot is interesting. Well, it shows his adventures, and there's this sort of standard villainous Dark Lord sort of bad guy character there. For the most part, that's not what the story is about. The story is basically a biography of Kvolf. It shows him growing up. It shows his life, his challenges, his romances. The overarching sort of Dark Lord plot does come into play at times, but it's almost inconsequential. It's almost that the book exists without it. Some of the plot deals with sort of the mundane life challenges, which I really like. I really like that stuff. It makes the book seem sort of realistic and quite grounded and interesting. So, even as a sort of magical character biography, it really is good in terms of its storytelling. You feel empathy for the characters, the challenges, the details of the world grip you, and you're genuinely interested in Kvolf. So the fact that, the classic bad guy storyline isn't needed, really, in my opinion, the book's great without it. And I think that just shows how good Rothfuss is at writing. Well, what's bad about it? Not much. I had two quibbles about it. Firstly, lots of people say this Kvolf is too perfect. He learns various professions, and he's talented at all of them. Not just good at them, but sort of super talented at them. He jumps various grades in his studies. He breaks various records. He's talented in the arts. Women fawn over him. He learns multiple languages. And he learns languages in impossible short periods of time. Just things that aren't believable and not realistic. So, and many people who read the book often complain about that. I didn't find it that distracting. He's the main character of a novel, so, he's sort of normal for a main character or protagonist to be gifted and talented. Just he was a little bit over the top in that regard. So secondly, the other thing was that I did find the obvious sort of good versus bad story with the main villain. As mentioned, it's only partially touched on, and it's sort of almost like a side issue. He's generally not, the story is mainly about the daily goings-ons with Kvolf. That's not really a weakness so much because his life story, his day-to-day life, I thought was really interesting and I thought was really well done. But yeah, it's a little bit odd, I guess, rather than bad. I'm not sure. Anyway, overall, these were two minor things, I thought. For me, they didn't really detract from the book at all. They might for others, but for me, they were just little things. So Rothfuss has written the first two books for this series. The series is called The Kingkiller Chronicles. This is the name of the first one. The second one's called A Wise Man's Fear, which is this one. And then he's in the process of writing a third one, which he's taken 6 or 7 years or something to write. So he's a bit of a George R.R. Martin in that sense, and people are wondering if he ever actually will finish it. He's part way through it. But anyway, don't let that distract you because, these books are good, especially The Name of the Wind. So all up, I'm going to give it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Thank you. This has been my review for The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss for the Fantasy Review YouTube channel.